In this video, we're going to be looking at how to add dependency injection via Ninject into an existing application that uses Quartz. So before we add in Ninject, let's look at the application as it stands now. We have an interface called iDog, which has a signature for a method called bark, and chase mailman that takes an int. We have an implementation of that interface called golden retriever, where bark just writes bark to the console. Chase mailman, if the speed is greater than or equal to 5, we'll say this, otherwise we'll say that. We have one job in our app, and that job has a member called dog of type iDog, and we assign it by newing up golden retriever, which is an implementation of iDog that we just saw. And when we execute the job, we're just writing the time that it was fired, calling bark, and calling chase mailman from dog rather. And then in our program, this app is a console app. We're just getting a scheduler from Quartz as we would normally. We are scheduling a job of dog job, which we just looked at, and creating a trigger for it to fire every 2 seconds forever, and then starting the scheduler. So this is our setup without Ninject, and if we run it, we can see it working. So we see that every 2 seconds, it's calling our dog job and saying bark and caught the mailman. So that's great, but in the ideas of dependency injection, what we'd really like to do is not have to new up golden retriever, but rather to receive implementation of iDog in the constructor. So we'll go ahead and do that and receive an implementation of iDog in the constructor. That way we don't have any tight coupling. So if we just run this without adding anything regarding Ninject, it's not going to work. We're going to see that nothing's being printed here, and what's happening under the covers is Quartz is trying to fire this job and new up dog job, but it's not able to because it doesn't know how to provide this. Hence, we're going to be adding Quartz to provide the dependency injection for us. So first thing we need to do is add the Ninject library to our project, which I've already done. You can just snag that via NuGet, and you don't need any of the other extensions, just the base library, Ninject. The next thing that we need to do, or before we go on to the things we need to change, things that do not need to change are our interface, so I'll close that, nor our implementation of that interface, nor our job. Besides the fact that we're now getting it from the constructor, none of our execution of the job needs to change at all, so I'll close that as well. What we need to add is what's called a job factory. So a job factory is what Quartz uses. Basically, when a job is triggered to run, it has to new up that job, so in our case dog job, and later go on and execute it. So a job factory basically provides the job to be executed. So basically it's newing up jobs. So we're going to make our own factory, which we call Ninject Job Factory. And it's inheriting from Simple Job Factory that Quartz provides. And in our constructor of that, we're going to take an iKernel, which is a Ninject object, which is basically a super factory for making objects, as it says. And the one method we need to implement from Simple Job Factory is new job, which is simply, it needs to create a job. And so this has the role of basically newing it up. So it's very simple what we're doing. We're just using the kernel we got from the constructor, and we're saying get the type of job that we need to run. So in our case, it's dog job. And Quartz is going to be able to look at our dog job and see that, oh, it needs iDog, and provide that dependency for us. So this is all that our Ninject Job Factory is doing. Again, Quartz is using this to new up jobs that it needs to run. So now that that's in place, we need to update our code to actually make use of this job factory. So if we go to our program class, I made a little method here called initialize Ninject kernel. So it's going to do just that. It's going to make a kernel and basically set up some bindings for us. So yeah, we're going to make the kernel here, and I'll skip this just for a second. These bindings are what you would normally see. So when we want iDog, we're telling Ninject to give us golden retriever. That's normal Ninject stuff. But here, where we, before we use Ninject, we're sort of using our scheduler, and that's sort of it. So for using Ninject, what we want to do is say when we need a scheduler, run this method. And all we're doing is, just like before, we're getting the scheduler, no different than what's happening up here. But then we're assigning the job factory for the scheduler to the Ninject job factory that we just looked at. So the job factory for our scheduler is not going to be the default one, but rather our Ninject job factory. And you see that we're passing it the kernel, which is going to have all of our bindings. So it knows how to bind, in our example, iDog to golden retriever. The last thing we need to do is, instead of getting the scheduler this way, we're going to use Ninject to provide the scheduler for us. So very simply, we're going to call initialize Ninject kernel, which is going to set up all those bindings for us. And then to get the scheduler, we're going to say, hey Ninject, we need an iScheduler, which will run this method, which we already talked about. Set up the job factory, and now it's aware of of how to bind the dependencies that we need. And then we just move on as we were before, where we're scheduling the job and running it. So let's just see if this works, and then we'll set some breakpoints. So as before, we see it's running every 2 seconds, and it is calling bark and catch the mailman, and so it's printing those things just as before. So to make this sort of make some more sense, I'm going to set a few breakpoints so we can sort of see the play-by-play. Oops, do that there. We'll go here, here, and one more. So let's just play it and we'll walk through it. So we've entered our code, and we're going to call initialize Ninject kernel. That gets us into here. So here we're just setting up our bindings. So we're going to initiate our kernel bind iScheduler to that method. It's not actually going to run this method right now. It's just setting up the binding, as well as iDog to golden retriever. So we'll play from there. Now that we have these bindings, we're going to ask Ninject to give us an iScheduler, which it should run this little method here. We'll play it. It does. We call getScheduler just as before. It assigns the job factory to our Ninject job factory, and we're passing that our kernel. That works fine. So now it's going to have the scheduler that it needs. We'll schedule the job as normal, and then I'm going to start the scheduler. And so every 2 seconds, it's going to be needing an instance of dog job to run. So we should see it sort of landing here, which it does. Obviously, it's not happening every 2 seconds because we're debugging, but you get the idea. We see that we need a type of dog job. And so Quartz knows about dog job and that it needs this. And so when it news it up, we should see it enter into here and provide the dog, which it does, of type golden retriever, just like our binding dictated. And if we run from there, it's going to execute. We have our implementation. And if we look at the console, it printed what we would expect. And every 2 seconds, it would go ahead and run that new job method because it needs an instance of dog job. So that's a very quick way to get dependency injection into your existing Quartz application. If you use a different IOC container library besides Ninject, maybe something like AutoFact, hopefully you can see how you can go about doing that. Sort of the main crux of the whole thing is this job factory and updating our scheduler to make use of that new job factory. So thanks guys, and good luck.